Welcome to the West Ham Voice on a Wednesday afternoon. Thank you all for joining me. How many of us are relieved that the latest international break is finally over? Now, look, I've not done any thorough research on this, but it always feels as if West Ham come out worse when we have players on international duty. We either pick up unwanted injuries, as in the case with Mikel Antonio and Jared Bowen, or we return to domestic football a little bit sluggish and end up being on the receiving end of a poor result. So when it comes to West Ham United visiting Burnley this Saturday, I guess the home team is going to be hoping that they can pick up their second win of their season at our expense. When it comes to international football, it certainly irritates many West Ham fans, and I dare say the feelings we have over international breaks may also frustrate and irritate fans of other teams as well. You see, on the one hand, patriotism and international football go hand in hand. We want our national teams to do well, but when we don't, we kind of lose interest or reluctantly watch a game whilst contemplating doing other things like, I don't know, watching paint dry. Yet, despite our inertia over international qualifiers, we still want our best players to be recognised and selected for international duty. And when our players don't get selected, we get a little bit peed off and question whether the national manager is actually good enough to be doing his job in the first place. You've only got to look at the reference to the last two England squads when James Ward-Prowse was omitted by Gareth Southgate, despite James Ward-Prowse's impressive stats so far this season. Yet, as we watch the painful 2-week international break unfold, we all breathe a massive sigh of relief that Ward-Prowse didn't actually get picked, because knowing our luck, he would be yet another injury casualty, thus not being able to represent West Ham with his domestic duties. Many fans say club over country, because after all, it is the club that pays the players' wages. And many fans feel that the clubs should have a bigger say whether their players should fly out to all parts of the world to play international football. And when a player does return from international duty, who carries an injury, or if he's flown thousands of miles to potentially be too fatigued to represent his club effectively, the talking issue of club over country becomes more prominent. So why are clubs not allowed to be able to negotiate with national teams whether their players can go on international duty or not? I remember years back when Sir Alex Ferguson was considered to be one of the very slyest of managers who would say that his players were not available for international duty because they were carrying a knock, carrying an injury. And on occasion, he used to get away with it so that his players were rested for the next game that Man United would be playing. But we don't want domestic managers and clubs to become devious in order for their players to avoid representing their countries, and rightly so. Many players do want to play for their national teams. It's a matter of pride. But when there are situations suggesting that players shouldn't play or shouldn't be selected, this is where being called up by your country can become a little bit problematic. For West Ham, there are 3 players immediately that come to mind: Kudus And Alvarez, and Mohammedkudus. And I'll talk about those in a moment. But first, let's give you a brief update on the players that we know are injured. If you missed my video I put out on Tuesday, you know that I mentioned Jared Bowen might need surgery on his troublesome knee. But this will only happen after he's had further scans on his knee. Now, although hearing the words knee surgery sounds quite frightening, from my current understanding, Bowen has fluid on the knee, and a minor procedure called an arthroscopy could be carried out where basically the fluid from the knee is drained out and the player will spend around a week, 10 days, something like that, to recuperate before returning to action. So as I mentioned on Tuesday, this is what we're waiting on with Jared Bowen. He's going to have further tests in order to determine whether he needs surgery or not. And then, of course, I've also mentioned Mikel Antonio, his knee injury as well. Not as severe as we originally thought. And he could be out for no longer than a month or so, unless other complications are found. Now, for Bowen, That means, depending on if he does need the arthroscopy, he could miss 2-3 games at most, Burnley, TSC and Crystal Palace. For Antonio, he could miss up to half a dozen games with a potential return against Wolves in mid-December or the League Cup game against Liverpool on the 20th of December. But let's go back to Alvarez, Agurd and Kudus. Now, in our game against Nottingham Forest, there was a concern that Agurd's head injury when he collided with Thomas Soucek might stop him from being called up by the Moroccan national team. There was some relief that the World Cup qualifier match between Morocco and Eritrea was cancelled last week, which meant that the Moroccan staff had 9 days to assess whether Agurd was fit enough to play after his concussion scare. Now, regulations say that if a player does suffer from concussion, then they need at least 10 days rest in order to be able to be deemed fit to play again. So I guess 9 days, well, maybe it wasn't really concussion. It was more, as I said, more of a scare. And Agurd ended up playing the whole 90 minutes in the World Cup qualifier on Tuesday evening between Tanzania and Morocco, in which Morocco won 2-0. But you can understand why West Ham would have been concerned about releasing Agurd for international duty in the first place, and rightly so. When it comes to Kudus and Alvarez, it's not that Alvarez went on international duty carrying an injury in any way, but the 2 games he played for Mexico in the CONCACAF Nations League means that by the time he returns to England to team up with the rest of the West Ham squad, he would have travelled something like 12,500 miles all round. Now, I think he's expected to be back today if he hasn't already returned. And that takes the trip from Mexico to London takes something like 12 hours by flight, which leaves him with rest for the rest of Wednesday to recuperate and probably be back in training on Thursday, where he'll be assessed for his fitness, jet lag, and so on. Now, in regards to Alvarez, I mean, Mexico's selection was wholly justified, as he scored a dramatic, vital last-gasp equaliser for Mexico to help his country secure a thrilling penalty shootout over Honduras in the quarterfinals of that tournament. Mexico were trailing 2-0 from the first leg and looked on course for defeat at the Azteca Stadium when they went into the 11th minute of added time, still trailing 2-1 on aggregate. However, Mexico's captain on the night, Alvarez, shot low into the bottom left-hand corner to spark wild celebrations in Mexico. The game remained 2-2 on aggregate throughout extra time, and then Mexico ultimately prevailed 4-2 winners on penalties, which meant they've advanced to the semi-finals. Now, that win means that Mexico have qualified to play in the Copa America tournament, which will be held in the US of A next June and July. Now, despite Antonio missing out on the next leg of the Jamaica game, they also qualified for that tournament as well when they beat Canada 3-1 to go 4-4 on aggregate, but they've gone through on the away goal rules. Then we have the curious case of Mohammedkudus. Look, last night I heard that Kudus had apparently had a bad back for several weeks. Now, that begs the question, if he's had a bad back, why was he even playing for West Ham United, let alone being called for international duty with Ghana? He went and played last Friday against Madagascar, which they lost. And then despite missing training on Monday, he came on as a second half substitute against Comoros on Tuesday. Look, Ghana lost both games. He 1-0. And Kudus played the whole game against. Kudus played the second half against Madagascar, but couldn't change the score. But why, if West Ham knew that the player was going on international duty, then why did they not push for the player to be omitted from that duty? On top of the back injury that he's sustained, the player will have flown around something like 20,000 miles from London to Ghana to Comoros and back to London again. That's if he made the straight trip back from Comoros, meaning that he would have spent something like, in the last sort of 7 days, something like 24 hours on plane trips. The last thing you want when you have a bad back is to be flying all over the place. Now, the only other player on international duty was Dinos Mavropanos, who played the whole game in the Euro 2024 qualifier against France. Greece will need to secure their place in the tournament via playoffs now after concluding their Group B qualifying game 2-2 against France in Athens on Tuesday evening. The draw saw Greece finishing third in the group. However, Greece will now have to take on Kazakhstan in the playoffs on the 21st of March next year. And the winners would then face Georgia or Luxembourg in the final 5 days later, with the winners progressing to the tournament in Germany. So now that the internationals are over, all eyes are, of course, on West Ham and how David Moyes can patch up the team against Burnley this coming Saturday. Look, we know Antonio is definitely missing and Bowen quite likely to be missing as well. And the big question mark is whether Mohammed Kudus will overcome his back injury in order to be selected. And that means there'll be inevitable changes to the lineup this coming Saturday. Add to that the need to assess Alvarez to see if he'll be capable of playing the whole game after his round trip will also be crucial. So what would David Moyes do? I talked on Monday night about the options he had available to him. And now that the picture is kind of slightly clearer, although not completely, Moyes has to really put trust in the squad that he has. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that we're going to be without Soufal because of his antics whilst on international duty, Antonio and Bowen because of injury, Kudus and maybe Alvarez, who might both not be fully match fit. Then Moyes will have to make changes and have a rethink. Since Monday, our lineup against Burnley may look something like this. He could stay with a 4-2-3-1. And if he does drop Soufal, he could potentially put Kehrer in at right back. If Kudus and Alvarez are not fully match fit, he can bring in the likes of Fornals, bring back Benrahma, and then he's got a choice to make, hasn't he, when it comes to who might play up front. And at this moment in time, I'm putting Danny Ings there. But he may surprise us. He may go for everyone and then maybe put Cornet up front instead, or may really surprise us and go for young Mumbama up front as well. Now, alternatively, he may decide without those players, without Soufal, without Kudus and without Alvarez, he may decide he wants to change the formation in order to give maybe Danny Ings a bit more, someone playing almost alongside him. So he may go for something like a 5-3-1, where he, puts Mavropanos in the back, puts Paquetá in the middle, and maybe Benrahma a little bit closer to Danny Ings up front. But, my gut says that he's going to, really rely on the players that may come back fatigued, may come back with slight knocks, etc. And this is what he's likely to. And he's also going to forgive Soufal. And this is what is likely to be the lineup for the game against Burnley on Saturday. Soufal will be in a back four. Alvarez will be put on, and only when he starts becoming fatigued during the game will Moyes likely to take him off and sub him. And then you're going to probably have someone like Benrahma and Paquetá and Souček supporting Kudus up front. Now, Kudus may require painkillers in order to get through the game, but I think that's what's likely to happen. You're going to see Soufal in the team. You're likely to see Alvarez until Alvarez completely loses his legs and has to be subbed. And fingers crossed, you're likely to see Kudus as well. Will Bowen play? I don't think Bowen will make it this coming Saturday, but I guess we'll see with a late fitness test. Thank you all for watching. As usual, I'll come back with more news once it happens. Have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you all soon.